It had all the lurid drama of a TV movie, and in fact, a movie eventually was made about the case. On May 19, 1983, Elizabeth Diane Downs shot her 3 children. She killed one and then told police a stranger had attempted a carjacking. Here's KEZI 9 News producer Sean Sharpie.
The side panels of the car were covered in blood. There was a young girl in the front passenger seat, another young girl and a small boy, who they could hear gasping for air, in the back. All 3 were soaked in blood. The girl in the back seat, Cheryl, was dead.
What do I see most is blood coming out of Christy's mouth, because that's what I see. I can't see Danny, and I can't see Cher. Sherry was laying on the floor.
Medics quickly went to work on the other 2 children who were still alive, and in what doctors call nothing short of a miracle, both children were saved, despite Christy having been shot in the chest and Danny in the back.
Danny is just crying real soft, so that sound stays in my mind, and the fact that Christy's choking.
Downs told police a shaggy-haired stranger had waved them down. He pulled a gun on them, asked for the keys, and when Downs refused to hand them over, opened fire on all 3 children.
Bang, bang.
Yeah. I'm sure he didn't intend to shoot my arm.
The gun kept firing and firing and firing, and it was monotonous. It just kept going. It was like a slow motion picture. When he swung around, he was pointing, when he swung around, it hit the tips of my fingers. The gun hit the tips of my fingers, and that snapped me. And I went, wait a minute. I'm not trapped by society. I don't care if he is bigger. If I stand here and I say, yeah, here, take the keys. I mean, there's nothing I can do. You win because you have the gun. My kids are going to die. And I'm not going to let my kids die. And so instead of giving him the keys, I feigned throwing the keys.
An emergency APB was issued and the manhunt was on.
And who would have a motive to do this, or if it is just some total stranger?
As the night wore on, though, investigators and hospital staff were stunned by Downs' demeanor. She was not hysterical, not crying. She even left the hospital to show investigators the location of the shooting.
He did not take time to point the gun and shoot me, obviously, because he would have shot me the same way he did the kids. When he was swinging in the direction of the keys, firing the gun, he hit my arm. Everybody says, you sure were lucky. Well, I don't feel very lucky. I couldn't tie my damn shoes for about 2 months.
Upon returning, she asked how her kids were doing. The nurse told her doctors were doing everything they could. Downs laughed and said, quote, only the best for my kids. She chuckled again and said, quote, at least I have good insurance. As the days and then weeks went by, investigators had no leads on the shaggy-haired stranger. They were never able to find the murder weapon.
So far, their search has failed to turn up the murder weapon, a .22 caliber automatic pistol.
But what they did have were doubts. Why would a man looking to steal a car shoot 3 kids and not the driver? How did Diane escape with just a bullet wound to her arm?
You always have family as a suspect. That's just simply a matter of course.
And was it possible for Downs to get shot in the arm and never reach over and grab at the wound with the other hand? A hand that when she showed up at the hospital had absolutely no blood on it.
And we're going to clear this case, and the guilty person's going to go to jail. And that's just the name of that game.
Even with all these questions, District Attorney Pat Horton was reluctant to charge Downs. The murder weapon was still nowhere to be found. Danny was paralyzed from the waist down, and the one person who could give a second account of the horrific events of that night had suffered a stroke and wasn't capable of communicating clearly. At least, not yet.
Well, the details just didn't add up, and investigators began closing in. That's the part we'll focus on tomorrow. See what led to Downs being arrested and eventually tried and convicted for the crimes involving her own children.
It was one of the most high-profile murder cases in Oregon history. The story of Diane Downs and the events surrounding the shooting of her 3 children, one of them fatally.
That was in 1983. As we told you last night, investigators were troubled by Downs' own account of the night in question. Well, fast forward to 1984. By now, Downs had acquired a perverse celebrity. In fact, she was often referred to as Princess Di, always maintaining her innocence, always maintaining that some bushy-haired stranger had shot her and her 3 children. KEZI 9 News reporter Sean Shoppy picks up the story with the nuts and bolts of her trial.
Prosecuting attorney Fred Hughey would paint a picture of a woman obsessed with a married man who didn't want to have kids and who wouldn't see her when children were around.
We're going to try and push this thing to a fact-finding as quickly as possible, and you'll see then that there's nothing there.
Doctors took the stand and told stories of a woman who showed up to the hospital with a dead daughter and 2 other kids clinging to life, yet who shed nary a tear. Jurors were taken to the scene of the crime. A model of the car was brought in. The blood splatters on the outside of the car showing Downs shot Cheryl outside of the car.
We saw pictures of this so-called spatter. It's drops. When they took the kids, they took Chris and Cher out of the driver's side of the car, and it's blood droplets.
The children's bloody clothes were shown, but the most dramatic and probably most damning evidence came when Christy Downs, now 8 years old, took the stand.
Downs' own daughter testified against her. Christy Downs was asked by prosecutor Fred Hughey, "Do you know who shot Cheryl?" Christy said quietly, "Yes." The prosecutor struggled to keep his own composure. "Who?" The young girl sobbed, "My mom."
The trial would last 6 weeks, and then on June 17th, the verdict came in.
The moment of truth came early Sunday morning at 12:45. A jury of 9 women and 3 men found Downs guilty of 2 counts of attempted murder and 2 counts of assault the night before.
Between the time of the verdict and the sentencing, Downs gave birth to a baby girl, Amy, who was put up for adoption. Downs received a life sentence. There was no death sentence at the time, and in 1987 she escaped from the Oregon Women's Correctional Center. She was moved to a prison in New Jersey, and then eventually moved back to the West Coast to a California prison she calls home today. She still maintains she's innocent, though her story has changed over the years, from the bushy-haired stranger to 2 men in ski masks, to the most recent tale that involved a phone call that lured her to the road to pick up evidence for a supposed FBI boyfriend she had at the time.
Was there a time when I had doubts? Yes, there was. The first night, as a matter of fact, I had doubts. Diane had been shot in the left arm, and she's right-handed, and I made the comment to the police department there that night. It looks to me like Diane did it, because the children have been shot in the chest, and Diane has only been shot in the arm. And I says, it really looks like she did it.
Christy and Danny, meanwhile, like Amy, were adopted. Their new father, Fred Hughey, the very same man that put their mother in jail for life.
Dad just hit my cast.
Sean Shoppy, KEZI 9 News.
Diane Downs is being held at the Valley Prison for Women in Chowchilla, California. She was denied parole in December 2008, which means that she's eligible to request it again this year. If she ever is granted parole, her release will be delayed 14 months. That's because she received additional punishment for the prison escape in 1987.